So I think we might even start and begin. Lovely. So, excellent. Welcome. Hello. Okay, my name is Duncan Chapple. I'm going to be opening up the webinar for a little while today, and I'm going to be introducing my colleague, my boss, Paul Nolan, who is here on the webinar with me. Just as a few housekeeping notes, obviously, we're in a really intriguing time for the world. So people are going to be much more familiar with Zoom than they were perhaps a few more months ago. But if you have questions or comments at any time, feel free to put those into the Q&A column or into the chat. We'll try to address them as we can do. We're also recording this, so if you need to leave early, or if it's just really fascinating and you want to hear some particular comment a second time, you'll be able to come back in the replay and hear it later on. So so that will be available within moments of the end of the webinar. Okay, I want to start off by making some introductions. Firstly, of Paul and I, and then secondly of CCgroup. So Paul is probably known to quite a lot of the people who are on the webinar. He's one of the directors here at CCgroup. He's the head of our telecoms and mobile group, and has played a really leading role in working with so many organizations, many of them major suppliers to some of the most innovative telecommunications operators in the world. So we're really delighted to have Paul here, because I think he gives a really unique insight into all the analyst value that's outside the analyst relations remit, narrowly defined. You know, Paul's seen analyst value through content, through media, through events, and so on. And for people who don't know me, I lead the analyst relations practice here at CCgroup. So my colleagues and I, we're working with companies to help them to build better relationships with analysts, and in particular to try to identify analysts who are advising on the enterprise side, communications managers, and those who are using telecommunications technologies on the enterprise side, and then of course also those who are advising operators. CCgroup, for those of you who are perhaps new to us, we're a fast-growing business-to-business technology, PR, and marketing consultancy. This morning was really intriguing for us. Forrester Research just published a list of leading public relations companies, and we were really delighted to be on Forrester's list. Really charming for us to be on their radar as a group of public relations professionals who are able to deliver value. Most of us are here in London, but we have operations in the United States as well. We are 30 years young and still independently owned. We are commercially focused, so not just focused on getting reputation for people, but driving results that drive the bottom line, that drive sales. We come into that later on. Unusually, we have a in-house industry analyst relations team, and we're especially proud to be one of the top 3 agencies for client satisfaction, and that is really our North Star here. One of the things that makes us different is that we are particularly focused in 4 deep market areas. The largest of these is mobile and telecommunications, and so it's a real pleasure for us to be able to talk about influencing buyers through telecommunications analysts today. So that's the theme for today's webinar. Just as a reminder before I go in, because I see a couple more people have joined, if you have questions or comments at any time, feel free to pop those into the Q&A panel or into the chat panel. We can't pretend that we'll pay attention to them straight away because we might be talking, but we do have time at the end of the webinar to address any questions and comments that come in. Obviously, if you have questions and comments you don't want to share straight away, then feel free to email us. Okay, what I want to do next is just step through the key elements in the webinar today, just to make sure that we are lining up with your expectations. So firstly, Paul is going to be talking about the opportunity of analyst influence. So we talk about influencing buyers and influencing markets more broadly through telecommunications analysts, but exactly what is that influence? What does that look like? So Paul has commissioned some research, in fact more than one research study, looking at the impact of analysts. Most recently, looking at the impact of analysts on the operator side. There's an earlier study looking at the impact on kind of enterprise communications. I'm going to be talking about some of the obstacles and options around analyst influence. I mean, on the one hand, there's this big opportunity, but then lots of people don't realize that opportunity. They're very frustrated by the lack of this opportunity being realized for them. So I'll talk about that. And then later on, I'm going to share some research for you from the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh. They organize the Analyst Value Survey every year. The CCgroup sponsors that survey. So we have some data there that we will share with you. And then we'll move on to some questions and comments. So Paul, I'm going to move over to you now, and through the wonders of cyberspace, I'm going to try to hand over control of these slides to you. I hope that will work. But if it doesn't, you can just shout at me, and I can press the up and down buttons as we move through the slides.
Okay, so I'm assuming everyone can see the slides okay. I am wanting just to share with you my perspective on how I think analyst influence has grown over the last 15 years of which I've been involved in the telecommunications industry. And I think I also wanted just to give a sense as to why I think this is really a prime time for the analyst community, because the short of it is so much has changed in the industry over the last 3 to 5 years. If you think of the nature of how networks are built, services are offered, looking at the advent of 5G, mobile edge computing, the cloudification of the network, there are so many different technology challenges and decisions for everybody to make. And I suppose when I do talk about this, I do include a slight bias towards the operator community, and that's purely because as an agency, about 90–95% of our clients are actually the vendors that sell into the operator community. So I do have a slight bias that I think I should probably just admit to right from the outset. But it's because of the growing influence of the analyst community that CCgroup took a strategic decision to invest more heavily in analyst relations as a capability. I think, like so many different agencies out there in the past, we were guilty of maybe being a little too transactional in terms of how we approached our analyst relations. It was a little bit box ticky, and we really weren't kind of getting to grips with the strategic requirements of our clients in terms of really unlocking the value that the analyst community could deliver to them. So that led us to actually working with Duncan, and we're delighted to have him, an expert that has literally wrote the book on analyst relations, to have him in our team and to be leading our analyst capability. So when trying to kind of measure what is the opportunity of analyst relations, we really need to consider what it is that telecoms companies actually want. And we distilled this down into 3 very, I think, obvious areas, but I think it's useful just to kind of frame the conversation in some way. The first one is brand awareness, right? So every company out there wants to be visible, both in its core market, but also in potential new markets. And I think that's a really important distinction. While there is so much diversification going on within the industry at the moment, there are so many companies out there that are looking to diversify and stake a claim to new opportunities outside of perhaps what they've been doing for the last 5–10 years or more. So it's about companies making sure that analysts know them for the right reasons and understand the trajectory in which they're on and where they want to get to. Second one, market reputation. Again, it sounds obvious, but companies want to be respected, and they want to be positioned favorably against the competition. And we laugh at all of the depositioning that goes on. The vendors like being up in arms about the Gartner Magic Quadrants and where various companies are kind of linked with regard to the competition. But this stuff matters. It's a really big deal. So again, making sure that there's an accurate perception of the company in the mind of the analyst world is extremely important. And then, not last but not least, sales leads. I think that everybody, from an agency perspective that pays our fees every month, want to know that everything that we're doing has a commercial outcome to it. I mean, all of our clients all share one thing in common. They want to be more commercially successful. They want to achieve revenue growth. And they want to unlock every single marketing channel available to them, to build influence and to drive that opportunity. And as we've seen, analysts are becoming more and more important in helping our clients do that. So let's just look at those three areas, individually. So awareness, at a base level, analyst relations can help drive awareness of a company and its proposition as it exists, but as I said, also in terms of how it wants to evolve as well. And the most common way to do this is that by this ongoing program of briefings is to actually acknowledge and understand who are the most influential analysts across all of the areas in which a business operates, and then having a structured and strategic program to make sure that they are updated on on what a company is doing on a regular basis. If you are speaking to them regularly, then you're confident that the analyst is always up to date on what the business is doing, what the key market issues are, and you're giving yourself every opportunity to be included in reports, to be mentioned in blogs, and to achieve as much validation as we can possibly get. But I don't think blogs and reports themselves are the extent of value which analysts can actually deliver to companies at this moment in time. From my perspective, what I've seen, influential analysts are highly visible anyway. I mean, there's an awful lot of them that moderate industry conferences, for example. I mean, we work very closely with the GSMA every year to help put together a conference program. We try and get our clients, as many of them as possible, involved in those particular discussions. And I've seen firsthand that the majority of moderators for each of those different discussions are respected industry analysts that are, experts in that particular topic that is being discussed. And they actually have a very, very active role in helping the GSMA actually bring different participants together. It's not their decision exclusively, of course it isn't, but the GSMA do invite them to have a say. So the better known any particular organisation is to the most influential analyst in that particular sector, the better chances of being on that particular person's radar and to be invited for inclusion. They also they judge the majority of industry awards out there as well. Again, we work with GSMA to help select all of the judges for the Gloma Awards every year, and I can confidently say that at least 90% of the judges that we help recruit are industry analysts, across a wide range of different companies. It goes without saying that the better they know a particular company, its technology, the value it's delivering, its customer base, its the amount of revenue it is earning from different opportunities, then the more likely they are to be viewed favourably, even before they're actually reading the entries that are put in front of them. They're also, analysts are becoming publishers in their own right more and more and more. Most of them are active bloggers. Most of them are active and highly visible on social media. And also, as I've seen directly, the vast majority also have close relationships with journalists out there, and they are, on a read dial list. Every time a journalist is writing about a particular opportunity, they will have their top 3 or 4 analysts to contact about a certain topic at a particular time. Again, the more we are aware of who those analysts are that are seen as experts by those journalists in those areas, the more likely we are to have links references, testimonials, etc., from that particular analyst back to the company. And anything the more we understand those wider relationships, the more we can take advantage of them for the benefit of the organizations that we represent. Next one, reputation. This one is, I think, perhaps the most obvious. The more analyst validation and endorsement you can earn, the more the reputation of an organization is going to be enhanced. And companies praised for market or technology leadership by analysts are always going to be better differentiated than the rest. Then sales. I think this is an area where we are seeing more and more analyst influence. I think in it, the influence on the sales cycle, I think, takes several levels. It happens in several ways. I think the most obvious one is the analyst just making direct recommendations to their clients, and a lot of the clients of the analysts are the buyers of the technology which is going into the networks. And again, I'm kind of using this operator vendor bias again, but the more favorably any particular vendor is known to by an analyst that is making a recommendation, then obviously we are going to be we're going to benefit immensely by all of those different testimonials and references that an analyst can actually make about a particular company. Reports as well. Obviously, we talked about competitor analysis, looking at who all of the kind of leaders are in a particular area of industry development. The more favorably any particular organization is viewed, the better the chances that is going to lead to a shortlisting for any particular technology buyer looking for a particular solution for a particular problem. But then more indirectly, there's an awful lot more organizations that are working with analysts on a commercial basis. And I mean, as much as market intelligent competitor analysis, but also I think looking at, finding ways to work with analysts to actually reposition the problems that vendors help solve. So we work with our clients an awful lot just to understand what are the kind of key points of uniqueness that a particular client has against its competition, and then how can we actually work with an independent voice and a respective voice like an analyst to actually make the wider buying audience understand the implications of not fixing that particular problem in a particular way. And by kind of architecting a survey or industry data in a certain way, we can very effectively work with an analyst to present a problem in a unique way that positions our clients as the most compelling solution, and build a report with a compelling headline that gives us ammunition to take to the media and promote far and wide. And we've been through that process a number of times over the last few years, and extremely successfully. I mean, I can remember at least 3 or 4 examples in the last 2 or 3 years where we've actually built bespoke research that has achieved more than literally hundreds of downloads amongst the operator community, that literally positions a particular vendor in a very, very prominent and compelling way, and has led to sales opportunities as a direct result. And that is something which we will continue to be doing over the coming months and years, because it is highly successful. But then also, analysts are more and more involved in the sourcing process, for operators, for any particular vendor, actually working on the creation of RFPs, to select vendors for different opportunities. And they're also running a lot of the due diligence for M&A activity as well, and working on behalf of the investment community too. So you can see the culmination of all these channels being put together. You can quite see how having strong relationships with all of these different analysts can be a very, very powerful tool for any particular company to have. And those relationships are becoming increasingly important and need to be managed very, very carefully. And as an agency, not only do we recommend our clients commission research to actually understand market opportunities in a unique way, but it's actually something that we preach ourselves as PR practitioners. As I said to you, the majority of our client base are vendors that sell into the operator community, and we have surveyed the operator buyers a number of times over the last few years just to try and get different snippets of information that are that can be hugely valuable for our clients to help underpin strategic communications campaigns. And one of the things that everyone has been preoccupied with over the last 2 to 3 years has been the reinvention of the operator, and looking at and it's a well-worn phrase, looking at the impact of digital transformation on the operator community. I think with the rise of, as I said before, new technologies, new network architectures, new opportunities, there is never been a greater opportunity for operators and the vendors that serve them to diversify into new areas, and trying to get a handle on all of the different opportunities and all the different growth areas that an operator can have. There's no surprise that there's been so much flux going on within the leadership team of operators, and again, let's face it, a relative amount of indecision as well that has served to slow down the vendor buying process, because they are having, they've been taking their time to work out exactly the organizations that they want to be and what the implications of being a particular way has on the technology that it uses and the vendors that it chooses to work with. So we helped understand the impact of that period of reinvention on the vendor sales process to the operators, and work out how can a vendor be successful in selling to an operator when it doesn't quite know what it wants to become in its own right as it navigates the challenges that it has before it. And to cut a very long story short, there were 3 key areas that an operator looked for in terms of the shortlisting of vendors within the buying process. The first one sounds obvious, but it's important. The reputation of the vendor itself, right? Does it have a strong standing and position within the industry that can offer the validation and the comfort in the minds of the operators signing the checks? The second one was, well, does the vendor understand and empathize with the challenges that we're going through as an organization, and understand that we might not know all the answers at this moment in time, and that we require a little bit of understanding, a little bit of flexibility, and a little bit of patience in helping us get there? And then last but not least was, differentiation. What evidence have you got to tell us that your approach is better than all the other vendors that we are talking to? And if you look at the nature of those 3 areas, reputation, understanding, differentiation, those are all core areas where analyst consultancy is extremely valuable. And there's no surprise that actually there's more and more companies and operators themselves, let's not forget, talking to the analysts to better position themselves to be successful in all of these different commercial discussions. And if you want to have a look at this report in more detail, it's currently hosted on the CCgroup website, or if any of you wanted to drop me an email after this webinar, I'll happily send it to you and answer any further questions about it. But in looking at where do analysts fit in terms of influence on marketing channels, the simple answer is they're second in a relatively long list. They're second only behind the IT trade media and the publications, which just goes to show how important they actually are. And as I said, this is one of the key ways why we've made such a significant investment in building a standalone strategic analyst relations capability, because we think that this channel is only going to grow in importance as as I said, there's so many technology decisions that need to be answered as the technology industry moves forward. But that's obviously not an entirely, that's probably easier said than done in terms of how you can maximize that analyst channel. And I think it's probably a decent opportunity to hand over to the man that we're all looking to help us navigate our way through that particular series of challenges, and hand back to Duncan to talk about, what are the obstacles and what options do companies have in terms of overcoming them and navigating them? You're talking on mute, Duncan.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So Paul, I think what you've done there is super useful in kind of outlining what that opportunity is. And what I want to do is kind of step through some of the common obstacles, some of the options, and then present some of the data that we've found. So I think the first thing that has to be said is that the telecoms market is different. Yeah, it's different in some really fundamental ways. So unlike other market sectors, the telecoms market is really vibrant. You will often find, especially in the big operators, that they themselves have got in-house market analysts who might have more insight than some of the analyst firms that they're working with. So, and the degree of interconnection between operators who are often investors, acquirers, who are themselves vendors of enterprise services sometimes, makes the ecosystem very rich, much more interconnected, and to not have the kind of separation that we have, say, in the enterprise technology market, where enterprises are quite distinct from vendors. Secondly, we've got the rise of non-traditional influencers who are increasingly influential. They might not operate like traditional analyst firms. Very often they've got a very tailored approach based on value exchange, on advice around particular scenarios. But because of that very compact ecosystem, you can have influencers who've got strong influence in particular sectors or particular countries. And then finally, and particularly because of the way that the telecommunications industry is in the midst of this huge transformation, influencers are rising in influence. Maybe we could have said this last year because of the way that organizations were struggling to transition to 5G or to make use cases for 5G. But now with COVID-19, with the way the market is changing, we see the market looking for leadership, looking for expertise to help them to navigate through this change. And both the traditional and non-traditional analysts are much more influential now than they were previously. So that makes the obstacles that confront analyst relations professionals and marketers all the more challenging. So the obstacles that are preventing people from realizing this benefit come in various forms. Most obviously, I would say, there are problems of understanding. If you're a vendor, you tend to be speaking to analyst firms more that sell to vendors. If you're an operator, you tend to be speaking most to analyst firms who speak to operators. And that means that very often you're speaking to analysts who have got the same weaknesses of perception as you have. You may not understand which analyst firms are really impacting your customers. Yeah? So there can be a huge contradiction between knowing which analysts are really thinking about your problems and which analysts are thinking about your customers' problems. So it's hard to understand the firms. Within the firms, it's hard to understand the analysts. And it's extremely challenging, I see, for organizations to know how to engage. Yeah? Some people think they can engage with analyst firms just by becoming customers. Other people think that they need to simply be drowning the analysts in information. Others think that they simply need to be asking the analysts for advice. It's very hard to get that influence, to get the balance right that optimizes your influence. And it can be really hard for people to know if it's going well. Especially, you might have great relationships with completely the wrong analysts, and you might not know it. You might not know which analysts have got growing influence in the analyst community. Then I think there's a huge challenge of expectations. I think many executives think that they are simply going to tell analysts what they want to tell them, and the analysts will go away and write that up. And only the least influential, most trivial analysts will behave that way. Very often they misunderstand the value of conversation. You know, it's a two-way street. You can get a huge amount of insight from analysts. Very often people underestimate the time required. It takes a lot of time to change the mind of an analyst, and in the same way that a big pot takes more time to boil than a little kettle, it takes more time to change the opinion of analysts. And that can be very frustrating for executives, and it can be a challenge for us to drive the engagement if the time with our stakeholders are limited, especially because analysts don't act like the media. You know, you don't just get coverage. You might get increasing numbers of mentions over time, but really you have to build quite deep relationships before the influential analysts start talking about you. And it's a long-term program. You know, you have to be in it for the long term to derive value from an analyst relations program, because initially you have to build awareness and build interest, build relationships before you can generate advocacy. And that really brings me to this third major obstacle that we see, which is investment. Yeah? It is difficult to engage the analysts if you don't take the time to get to know the analysts. The most effective way to get briefings is by studying the analysts, understanding what their research priorities are, and being able to show your relevance to them. And of course, analysts are suitably skeptical. You know, there are piles of vendors who will say, we've got no competitors, we're the only people solving this problem, you know, coming out with things that really sound nonsensical to analysts. And it can be really hard for vendors to develop the consistency, the understanding, the expectations, and the right level of engagement needed to influence analysts. And because of all of these weaknesses, it's really hard to drive advocacy. You know, in a certain sense, if you know what to do, it's not that hard, but most people don't know what to do. So it's really hard to drive advocacy if you don't know what the levers are. Let me step through some of the options that we're facing. And I think in particular, it's worth saying that organizations have got to make a choice about values, you know, a choice about their communication style before they think about how to make analyst relations work. Because to be honest, lots of organizations aren't really engaged in trying to make analyst relations work. And one of the things that we talk about, obviously we didn't coin this phrase, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. On the one hand, there's good analyst relationships, there's dialogue, mutually beneficial. The company and the analyst are both deriving value from the conversation. They know what they want to realistically achieve from every engagement. But that can only happen if the company is informed about the work that the analyst is doing, if the analyst relations practitioners have got treated with respect by the vendor, if they're prepared to use the knowledge and to collate the knowledge that they're building up of analysts' stances on particular technologies. And very often the analyst will need insight from the company more than the company needs insight from the analyst. But very often you'll find spokespeople who go into briefings and they just want to suck information out from the analyst without having built the rapport or shown that they are peers in knowing what's going on in the market. But unfortunately, this dialogue approach is often rarer than you would imagine. And lots of organizations are the bad. Yeah, they're doing broadcast. So it's just proactive, they're distributing content, they're pushing it out. It's a generic scattergun, not prioritizing the analysts with the most impact on customers, really staying inside their comfort zone in a certain sense of pushing content out. But this really doesn't help perceptions to shift, and it definitely doesn't help engage with analysts who you want to see as advocates in the future. But I'm sad to say it gets worse than this, because worse than blunderbuss, badness, there's also the ugly. Often you see organizations that just presume that their agenda are the only thing that matters. They will not adapt their language to the analyst's language. They will position the company in ways which are not immediately credulous. And these companies will also pivot very often away from the most influential analysts and towards yes men. Yeah? So they'll put their spokespeople in a comfort zone, but providing a completely false idea inside the company of whether the broader analyst community is advocating you or not. But if you're able to focus on this dialogue approach, it is a match made in heaven. Yeah? And it's a three-way match. Yeah? I'm not trying to suggest some kind of menage a trois, but what you have here is a triangular arrangement. Is a triangular arrangement where analyst relations and public relations and the analyst can work together in a completely symbiotic way. Yeah? That public relations can amplify and increase the impact of analysts. Yeah? And make life easier for analysts. As individual analysts, their views, their opinions, they can be amplified greatly. And of course, public relations can also amplify and increase the impact of good analyst relations, and analyst relations can amplify and impact and increase the impact of analysts and of public relations practitioners. Okay, time is getting on, so I want to just move on and share some data with you. I mentioned earlier on that we have this relationship with the Analyst Observatory. So I've got some slides from our colleagues at the University of Edinburgh. So stand by for the mind-melding shift in PowerPoint template. Oof, wow, how did that happen? Okay, so just for context, these are from our colleagues at the University of Edinburgh. Slides here, some of you may have seen some of these slides before if you attended the Analyst Firm Awards in December. Just for a bit of context, so the Analyst Firm Awards, it's an annual survey that asks people who use analyst firms which analyst firms produce the most data. At CCgroup, we are blessed to be the sponsor of the Analyst Firm Awards. These awards leverage the data from the Analyst Value Survey, which is based at the University of Edinburgh and is supported by a generous 3-year grant from the Economic and Social Research Council, which is the British government. And it asks people which topics they use analysts for, which services are the most valuable, and which firms are the most valuable in providing those services. So the survey asks about 8 different services, all of which are quite highly valued. And we ask in the survey which topics people use research on. And so the telecommunications and networking part of the study is focused on people who are using research on these topics. Yeah, so people who take the survey, they might be using analyst research on anything, but what we see here are people who are using data on these topics. The way that the observatory calculates the analyst value is basically they look at which services are people consuming and which of these services do they consider to be most valuable. And actually, in the telecommunications sector, there are just 6 firms that produce most of the analyst value. So obviously, we ask about dozens and dozens, scores and scores. The survey must collect information about around 100 different analyst firms, I imagine. But there are 6 firms that produce just over half of that data, and they are these 6 here. Ovum, of course, has become Omdia recently. But those were the 6 firms that won the award. And actually, all of these 6 firms were also winners in the 2018 Telecoms and Networking Analyst Firm Awards. So there wasn't a very big change. There was one notable riser in the awards, which was 451 Research. They did notably better in the survey this year than the previous year. And they also talk about these gold firms. So the idea is that the platinum firms are slightly more than half of the analyst influence. Platinum and gold firms added together are slightly more than 2/3 of all of the influence. So you have this second tier of firms which were also influential. Informa Tech, of course, is now rolled together with Ovum in Omnia. And of these firms, one of them fell notably from the 2018 study, and that was Frost & Sullivan. In fact, there was one firm that fell even more, ISG, which obviously is really working at the managerial rather than technical level, especially involved in outsourcing and sourcing contracts. I've got a few more comments about that later on, and a blog post. If you see this URL, if you want a copy of the slides, of course, we will send you a copy of the slides. You can read more about the awards there. So we have these platinum and gold winners. But actually, when we looked into these, when the scholars at the university looked into these data, they noticed that there was a kind of hidden lump of influencers behind there. And this slide is something that people might not have seen before from the Analyst Firm Awards. So when we look at people who are using research on these telecommunications topics, what we see is that many people who are in the telecommunications industry are actually not mostly using research about telecommunications topics. You know, they might be using research about artificial intelligence, for example, or about Internet of Things. You know, they might be using things which are, you know, research that's highly relevant to people in the telecommunications market, but it might not be research on telecommunications topics. And when we look at people who take the Analyst Value Survey, what we also see is that some people are using most of their research on these topics, and some people are reading about these topics, but many other topics. So there's this new methodology that we've introduced called Hidden Champions. What the Hidden Champions methodology does is it spotlights the users of analyst research who are super heavy users of research on these telecommunications and networking topics. And when we look at that data, there aren't very big differences. In some market sectors, there are bigger differences, but one thing that stood out here was that G2 and Deloro Group are really punching above their weight with people who are specialized users of telecommunications research. So that's the data from the University of Edinburgh. What I'm going to do now, just three things. I'm going to go to my next placeholder slide. I'm going to have a sip of water. And I can see that there are some things in the chat panel. I'm just going to glance at the chat panel in case there are any questions in here that I should be addressing while I sip my water. Okay, I'm gonna come back to these points later on. Let me just quickly step through how you do this. Yeah, what is the way that you drive these benefits from your analyst relations program? Earlier on, Paul was kind enough to mention one of the books I've written on analyst relations, influencer relations, value through analyst relations, I think it's called. Insights on Analyst Value is the subtitle. And in the book, Influencer Relations, I use this five-part model, which people who've read Ephraim Malik's book on analyst relations, Win Them Over, will recognize this model from there. So there are these things that you need to go through if you want to optimize your value from analyst relations. And honestly, none of them seem to be totally straightforward. The most important thing is to identify the right analysts. Yeah, you can understand who are the most influential people on your market, the most influential analysts on your customers in various ways. One of the easiest ways is to just listen to your internal stakeholders and understand, you know, what problems are they working on, what challenges are their customers facing, and then you look at the analyst firms and you say, who in the analyst firms would pick up the phone if a customer called up with those problems in mind? Driving goals is really important. Before you reach out to the analysts, understand where you are, understand where you want to be, because then you can set realistic expectations about the kind of progress that you want to make, identify the most important engagements for you. For example, with many of our customers, we find that they are not putting enough effort into the most important analysts, and we get them to do that. We change their communication tactics, get them to spend less time with little boutiques, more time with the most influential firms, for example. Setting out techniques for engagement is really really important, because on the one hand, it's really easy to get briefings. You know, if you ask an analyst firm for a briefing, you haven't already briefed them before, and you look even slightly relevant for their research, they're probably going to accept a briefing request from you. But very often, these briefings are not very engaging. You know? Either they're badly timed, or they don't really address that individual analyst's interests. People come along with a deck that's that's just picked at random out of the intranet, but is not really addressing the information that the analysts need, or how and when they want that information to be shaped. Alignment is really important. Yeah? The more you're aligned to the rest of the business, the easier your analyst relations will be. Yeah? The more you're able to focus on analysts who will drive business value, the better. The more you understand what your stakeholders need and have, the better, especially if you can find resources, surveys, case studies, customers, subject matter experts. If you can bring things out from the organization, then it's easier. If you can use insights from your briefing to show impact on what's going on internally, that will help you. And the more that you can use the analyst relations program to accelerate the use of analysts in the organization and to help salespeople to use analyst insights, the more valued analyst relations will be. And that brings me to leverage, the final part of this ideal acronym. Analyst relations is one of these rare roles that can really add benefit everywhere in the organization, especially now where analysts are sitting at home. They've never had a higher volume of inquiry from analysts. They've never been able to make a bigger impact on their clients, and that means analyst relations has never been able to make a bigger impact. So what I'm going to do now is just move to questions we're getting on. I can see there are a couple of questions in the Q&A panel. I can see that for me, actually, the Q&A panel is working a little bit better than the chat panel. So if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A panel. A couple of questions earlier on about these hidden champions. Yeah? So there were two firms people may remember stood out as hidden champions. One was G2 and the other was Del Oro, and these are really different organizations. So with G2, of course, people know that G2 is an organization that is collecting surveys, large volumes, hundreds of thousands of surveys. And over the last couple of years, since it's rebranded from being G2 Crowd to just G2, is now a conventional analyst firm. But the analysts are very often starting from the briefings that are the reviews that are being collected. So I think what G2 is giving insights on are applications that are being used by telecommunications professionals, either in the enterprise or in operators, or in other, in the public sector, for example. I think G2 is giving really deep information on what the user experience is like so far, and in that sense, it's like a rear view mirror. It's showing you what has been accomplished in the market. And Del Oro, I think, is best understood as looking forward. It's engaged in market forecasting more than anything else, in really quantitative assessment of market opportunities. So I think it's much more useful for organizations that want to size market opportunities. There's a question about what are the criteria for the analyst firm ranking. Well, I'm not really sure if this is what the criteria are these 8 different kinds of analyst value. So the survey asks people who use analyst firms, which analyst firms do they use, and which services matter for them the most. And then these people are asked, okay, for each of these firms that you use, which of these services do you use, and how well does that analyst firm provide that service? Yeah. So how valuable are the services, and how well does the firm produce those? And well, we basically weight each service that the analyst firm provides by how valuable it is experienced by its users, and then of course the more users it has, the more valuable it is. So what the ranking about in the analyst firm awards is about is which firms are producing the most value for their users. On the so Bain, BCG, McKinsey, why are they not there? I mean, I think a great thing about that sources of influence slide, remember that blue bar chart that Paul showed earlier, this is just one of the artifacts from the study that CCgroup read. So what I would recommend is get in touch with me or get in touch with Paul, or in any way, and then read the full report. I think you'll see things much more clearly. And then how to distinguish between analyst and research firms and the consulting and advisory firms. So in the survey, people have got a panel of organizations that they will pick, and this does include many of the big business advisory firms, KPMG and Deloitte, for example. There's also a write-in option. And so the reality is, as professionals, we think we know what the analyst firms are. Actually, lots of people don't really understand if Deloitte Research is a research company or an analyst firm, or where it is. And I think that for many people, the substitutes and the real thing look very similar. So actually, in the collection of the data, I don't think it's very helpful for us to arbitrarily exclude organizations that people are using. But clearly you can see that it is the analyst firms that look the most as analyst firms inside the study. So obviously we see them as being different, but the people who use them don't necessarily see them differently. These I think are all of the questions that are outstanding so far. Yeah, good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just move on to the final slide, because that's got an email address on it. So obviously we would love to stay in touch with you. Follow us on Twitter, join us on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram to see our cute office dog, and we're on Facebook too, and email us. If you want copies of the slides, if you want a copy of the report that Paul has got, you can email Paul or I. If you want to know more about our approach, more about the survey, then contact us. Good. Okay, so thank you so much for your time today. We've gone pretty much right up to the hour. I'm just checking to make sure there are no more questions. Good. I'm going to stop sharing now. Boom. Okay, so thank you so much for your time. Again, if you have any more questions and comments, please get in touch with us by email. And also sign up for our future webinars. I should have said, sorry. So our next webinar is coming up in a few weeks. It is on the future of work. So really about the way that analysts are understanding the change in the change in technologies that are being needed by organizations to support this dramatic change in working habits and working manners that we've seen. So the speaker there is David from Fuse, the analyst relations professional at Fuse, who as a video conferencing and unified communications suite have been essential to the transformation that many organizations have been changing. There's my colleague Katie DeCozar, who leads our enterprise technology team, who'll be talking about the work going on there, and I'll be back again sharing information from the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh with insight into which analyst firms are most influential on the enterprise. You've registered for this webinar, so you'll find out about the next one as well. But if you've got any colleagues who are interested in what's happening in the enterprise space, especially in enterprise communications, applications to support work, then please suggest that they should get in touch with us and get an invitation for that. Okay, thank you so much. Paul, I should also say thank you so much for your time and your contribution. Okay, thank you so much for your time, everybody. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.